Welcome to the Mom as Well podcast, where we are digging deep into the gifts and the gaps of foster and adoptive parenting. I'm Tara Hutton, and I'm glad you're here. Mama's Well. Yes, she is. Well, hey everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Mom as Well podcast. I am glad you were able to join us. This morning I was thinking about, actually all week I've been thinking about this, but this week marks 3 years since our family, the Hutton family, which used to be a family of 5, stepped into the courtroom. And the judge granted us permission to adopt 2 little girls, making us a family of 7. And, if you are in anywhere around foster care and adoption, but particularly foster care, you know that the courtrooms can be like a really scary place. And you have, basically it's the reminder, it's the quarterly reminder, one of many, that what you're doing is potentially very temporary, and the relationship and the bonds that you're developing are temporary, and that is so scary, especially when you are, we really don't have a lot of control in the courtrooms. And so, you know what? I thought that we should talk about that. And in order to do that, there's a group that I actually didn't get to take advantage of, but CASA, and CASA stands for Court-Appointed, let's see, what does it stand for? What does it stand for?
Court-Appointed Special Advocate.
Court-Appointed Special Advocate. Thank you. And to introduce, I have a friend, but also you just happen to be, and I'm going to read this till I get it right, but the Interim Development Director for CASA, Child Advocates of Montgomery County, which is where we live.
Yes.
And so, Lindsay Miller, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. And you know what? I kind of stumbled over that because I was thinking to myself, like, it would have been so nice, but I didn't have a CASA volunteer on our case, on any of the cases that I've been involved in.
Right.
Our case was in another county, and in that county, not everybody has the privilege of a volunteer, a CASA volunteer. So I'm excited that you could come and join us. And I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions because I don't know the answers. Okay. And I'm betting that a lot of our audience doesn't know either, may even be intimidated by what it is that CASA does.
Yeah.
So, but first, before we go there, will you tell us a little bit about your family and how maybe you even got linked up with CASA?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am married. Next year we'll actually have been married for 20 years.
Congrats.
To my husband, Marty. And we have 4 awesome kids, 2 girls, 2 boys. Our oldest is getting ready to graduate this year. So it's a whole new season for us with her getting ready to leave.
The launching.
Yes, I know. And it's such a bittersweet thing because I'm excited for her, but it's so crazy to think that she's going to move out of our house. How does that happen?
It does.
But anyway, so yeah, 4 kids, and I actually learned about CASA in kind of a funny way. My father-in-law, probably about 7 or 8 years ago, he bought all the adult children in the family a table at the CASA Gala for our Christmas gift. So instead of gifting us more stuff or more things that we didn't need, he contributed to CASA and bought the table for us to attend their annual fundraising gala. So
Wow.
I sat at that table and cried that night learning about what CASA does and how they impact children's lives, and knew that I would get involved at some point. I still had little kids at home, and so it wasn't quite the time for me, but as soon as my youngest was in kindergarten and in school during the day, I thought, okay, now's the time for me to jump in. So I immediately reached out and started the training to become an advocate, and they actually asked me to chair their gala while I was training to become an advocate. So it was like, okay, double, here we go. I'm going to try to become an advocate and also potentially chair their huge fundraising gala that they have in the fall and the spring.
So I'm going to stop you for a second because I think this is a really, really important point. CASA is a nonprofit.
Yes.
And so everybody, you were volunteering. This is not a paid job to be an
correct.
advocate. Okay.
Yeah. So Casa, the way that it's structured is we have a small staff, paid staff, and that is basically for the recruitment and the training of the volunteers. We go through some really intense training.
Okay.
And then also for the support of the volunteers. The volunteers do the work, though.
Okay.
So the staff on Casa is we have supervisors. So every volunteer advocate has a supervisor over them, so that when we go into the courts, which, like you said, can be a very intimidating thing, especially for someone who hasn't experienced it. We have a supervisor there that knows everything about everything, and they are there to answer questions and support you and help and just be there for you in that process. And then throughout the entire case as well, just anytime you have questions about what's going on in your case, you can call your supervisor, and they have all the answers and the resources that you might need for things that the kids may need. So the volunteers really do the work of Casa.
Okay. Okay. So you decide you're going to get trained. So before we talk about all that training, because I want to come back to that, because after we talk about what they do, I think we might have some people say, I want to do that. And then let's tell them how they do it.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
before that, tell us let's just start from scratch about court systems. Because, I mean, I literally scoured the DFPS website like hours at night trying to figure out what does this hearing mean? What is a mediation? What are all these things? And so I think a recap of that. Can you do that?
Yeah. So
I can help, but if we start with that and then we can just talk about like what is your role? What are those things? And then what is Casa's role in that?
Right. So basically when a child has been removed from their home and placed into the care of CPS, the way it works in Montgomery County is that we actually serve every single child that comes into care. So we're one of the very fortunate CASAs that get to serve 100% of the kids in our county. So every child that's taken into CPS care in Montgomery County gets immediately assigned an advocate.
Okay.
And as an advocate, we actually get to choose our case in a way. We are sent the cases that come out each week, basically given just some little information like the children's ages and their genders and maybe where they're placed right then when they've been removed.
Okay.
And then so that way we can decide, do we really want to work a case with a teenager? Would we rather have a smaller child? You know, do we want to make sure the placement is near where we are so it's more convenient if we're busy and working and stuff like that? So we take a case on, and then the very first hearing that happens, well, it depends on the case, but there's a hearing that happens usually pretty immediately after the child is removed, and we are usually within a day or two of taking a case, we're attending that first hearing. So that's always an interesting hearing because we don't know a whole lot about the case just yet.
Yeah.
We usually go and read the entire report at the CPS office so that we can gather like some information on what's going on, why the children were removed, where they're placed, and that kind of thing. And then we'll attend that first hearing. There's not a whole lot that happens at that hearing other than that, do we decide that they're staying in CPS custody or are they not at this point,
And that I learned is called the show cause.
Yes.
The show cause hearing.
Right.
Show the cause, and the judge says this is a good cause or this is not a good cause to remove the child.
Right.
Right? Okay.
Right.
I'm gonna chime in on the things I know because
Yeah.
it was harder in learning. Okay, so you got the show cause hearing. You hopefully have read the case. You've been able to see the case or the report.
Right.
From the investigator. And then,
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
And so then what you do after that is that you start to make contact. So you immediately contact where the child is placed. So they're either in a foster home or they're placed with a relative. And so you reach out to that person and you schedule to go and visit the child as soon as you can, because you want to get eyes on them. You want to see how are they doing, what do they need, what are their needs right now, and how can I help get those needs met? Because that's one of the biggest things we do. I mean, we do a lot of things, but is while they're in the care of CPS, we want to make sure that their needs are being met. So it's educational needs, medical needs, if they need certain therapies. We are kind of the squeaky wheel in a way that just keeps that in front of the judge's eyes and works with CPS alongside them to make sure that they're getting the services and the things that they need while they're in care.
I love that squeaky wheel analogy. Because, I was the squeaky wheel. It would have been nice to have a cohort.
Exactly. I know.
So, are you in contact with the child's attorney or ad litem?
Yes. So Casa Is, our official title is guardian ad litem.
Okay.
So ad litem just means for the suit or for the case.
Mm-hmm.
And so the children have an attorney ad litem, and then they have a guardian ad litem, and that's
Okay.
the Casa.
Okay.
So so we work alongside their attorneys and the CPS worker. I mean, we're contacting biological family. You know, we're trying to get as much information as possible about the child, about their family.
Mm-hmm.
If they're placed sometimes in a foster home, and we can find suitable family for them to be with, that's always the preference, because we know that kids do better with their biological family if it's possible that they can be with biological family. So we're always looking for options for them like that, as well as just making sure that their needs are met where they are at that time too.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you're meeting, you're connect. I like also that you're looking for, I mean, do you have what you need tangibly? I mean, do we have clothes? Do we
That's
have,
right.
you know, are we getting, like you said, the therapies and dealing with Medicaid, right, is challenging.
It is. It's a lot of paperwork. It's overwhelming. The process is a lot for people. So it's nice to have someone to just say, hey, let me look into that for you. Let me see what I can help you with. Let me, you know, and that's where my
y'all
supervisor
actually
would
do
come
it.
in. Yes, and we actually do it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing too about a CASA, I think that's very valuable, is that, you know, everyone else involved in the case has a bunch of other cases. The caseworker, the CPS worker, the attorneys are all assigned many, many cases.
Yeah.
We typically take on one case as a CASA advocate. Some take more than one at a time if they're retired and have a lot of time on their hands, but we typically take one at a time.
Yeah.
So we are very hyper-focused on that one child or that one set of siblings and making sure that everything is going how it needs to go for them.
Yeah.
So.
And let me add, I mean, this is kind of where I was going when I said the nonprofit thing, but I mean, it speaks highly. It speaks like incredibly highly, if that's a word, if that's a phrase, to that you're a volunteer. And not just a volunteer, like you had to put in hours of training to volunteer.
And that actually means a lot to the families when you meet them. That's one of the first things I say to a family member or a foster parent or anyone that I'm meeting right away is I do not work for CPS. I am not paid. I am not an attorney. I am a volunteer.
Yeah.
And that does mean a lot to them because they know at that time I don't have any interest in this at all other than the best interest of that child.
Yes.
That's the only thing I'm here for.
Yes.
And they all know that. And that's really important for them to know because it's not about anything else for us except for what's best.
One of the most important things because I know in my relationships with biological families, my daughter's family included, CPS is frightening.
Right.
And to have, you know, when we're afraid, and we know this from trauma, but it's hard to tell the truth. You know, when you're fearful, but if you can ease that fear, then you might
break down that wall just a little bit.
to build the relationships and really get somewhere.
Right.
So I think that's incredibly valuable. Okay, so we've gone to the show cause hearing, and then you leave that. I mean, at that point, the child is either reunified with parent or placed somewhere, and then your work probably really kicks in from that point, right?
Right. So our minimum requirement for the advocate is that we visit the children or the child once a month.
Okay.
There's some that do that more than that, but we have to see them at least once a month. Half of those visits have to take place in their placement so that we're not just meeting them somewhere. We're making sure that we're seeing where they're living.
Okay, so like every other month you go to the home, maybe you meet at a restaurant.
Yeah, and typically you do most of the visits in the home, but occasionally you can do a visit. Like if a child plays a sport, you can actually go to their their game and watch them play, and that's a visit too. And you chat with them afterwards. But yeah, half the visits have to take place in the placement because we want to make sure we're continuing to watch what's going on wherever they are. And then we are preparing for the next hearing, and those happen quarterly, like you said. And when we prepare for that, we also are preparing a court report for the judge to read. So all of our contacts, every single contact we make, every text message, email, phone call, in-person visit, we log as we're doing them. And then we create an entire report for the judge to read based on everything we've done, everything we've learned. Yeah. We have a place on that report where we make recommendations to the court saying, maybe we recommend a specific therapy that this child needs that they haven't gotten yet. Or maybe we recommend a placement change. If we feel like something is not going right where they are or we're concerned about their placement for any reason, we can put in that court report to the judge that we recommend that they be placed somewhere else.
Okay.
So the judge reads all of what we report to them, and they get that before the next hearing so that they're kind of aware of what's going on. And the judge, at least in Montgomery County, relies pretty heavily on what the Casas say, because they know that we're the ones that usually have the most knowledge about the case. Just like I said before, there's, the attorneys and the workers have a lot of other cases where we are just focused on that one. So we a lot of times have the most knowledge of everything that the child is getting and what they need, and we've seen them the most, and we're the most involved. So they rely pretty heavily on what we say and what we ask for them to do. Not always do they go exactly with what we say, but the judge definitely takes into account what we say and what we're asking for.
Have you felt, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but have you have you felt like you've been able to, I don't know, do you feel in alignment most of the time with, or have you had to, like, do you not feel in alignment? I guess that's the question.
With the other people in the case?
Yeah, because you have the foster parents,
right.
You have the biological parents, you have possibly multiple sets of biological family, right? You could have multiple fathers, you could have multiple mothers, you could have aunts, you could have all these parties to the case, and then you've got their attorneys. They all have attorneys.
Yep.
Then you've got your conservatorship worker, your CPS worker. I mean, there's a lot of parties.
Right.
Like, do you feel, has that been, just personally, is that an intimidating place? I mean,
It can be. So it really
especially
depends
if you don't
on the
line
case.
up.
It depends on the case. Obviously, they're all very, very different. And I've had a few where we were all in alignment and everybody was kind of moving in the same direction. And it's also very typical that you're moving down a certain path and you think, okay, this is the way we're going. And then all of a sudden, hard left turn, that's very typical as well. Things come up, and all of a sudden a family member will pop up that you didn't know about, things like that happen. So there's constant change for sure. But there have been cases where we've been very much in alignment. Those are easier, for lack of a better term, just because everybody's on the same page. We're all going to the court hearing asking for the same things. But then there are times where you're not necessarily in alignment, and those can be more difficult. It's a little more of an intimidating process to go into a courtroom and say something against what everybody else is saying.
Yeah. Because those are, I mean, it's just kind of an intimidating. The people can be intimidating.
Right.
I don't know about Montgomery County. But the other county that we were in, it was very intimidating.
Well, yeah, just a courtroom in general, I think.
Yeah.
Because you don't spend a lot of time in courtrooms typically. So just to go into that whole new environment, and there's a whole language that they use too, that if you're not super familiar with it can be intimidating. Like, what are they saying? Those, all the acronyms and things like that. But I actually had a case where I was the only one in the room advocating for something specific for these girls, and even going against what CPS was saying. And I was definitely intimidated by that process, but I knew that that's what was best for them. And so I knew that I was standing on something good and right. And so I just went in and I said, this is what needs to happen. And the judge actually went with what I recommended. Wow. Because they know. And it was very clear in that hearing that I knew the most about these girls and what they needed. And even though it was against what everybody else in the room was sort of saying they needed to happen, the judge went with what I said. And they're actually doing amazing now where they are. Great. Because, and that's when I truly knew the importance of our role, is that had I not been involved in this case, there's zero chance these girls would have been moved where they are now. And now they're doing well. And so
that's great.
To know that I was the difference maker in the room that time was so impactful for me, just to know, like, hey, there's a really big reason why I'm doing what I'm doing and why CASAs are so important in these cases.
Well, I keep going back to the volunteer piece because it speaks to the heart of the person doing it, because you're not gaining anything. You know what I mean? Matter of fact, you're putting yourself in very, very vulnerable, heartbreaking situations purposefully. Like, who does that? You know what I'm saying? So you do, there's a lot of credibility given, I think, or there should be, to that position, as the judge, the judge, I'm sure the judges know that. I mean, they know these people volunteered their time. Yeah, that's really cool. You know, you talked about they're doing really well. So is that case closed, or do you follow up? I mean, how does this work after cases?
So that's also just varies from case to case. It's really up to the family whether they want to stay involved with their CASA or not. Some families, that period of time represents a very difficult time, and the CASA can be a reminder of that, unfortunately. And, that's just part of it. Yeah. And so there are some families that just want to cut ties, and I don't really want to, that I want to forget about all of that, and you're a part of that. So we're just going to cut ties. But then there's a lot that really stay in touch with their CASAs. And I mean, my very first case, it closed, and then after it closed, they invited me to his birthday parties. And I mean, so there's definitely families that do want to keep that connection. Yeah. And so it really just depends, and it's up to them. But
it depends on what you showed up in court to say that day.
Yeah, it could be that too.
Yeah. I don't remember where I heard the story, but it was a youth who had aged out of care, and they spoke. I wish I could remember. It doesn't really matter, but they spoke about their journey, and just that this CASA volunteer was the only consistent thing throughout their youth.
Yeah, that's a huge thing as well.
Yeah, this volunteer just every single time, he, I can't even remember, but just constantly stayed in this child's life.
Right, because they can go through placement changes, they can have new CPS caseworkers, they can have attorney changes. Yeah. There's a lot of change that can happen when they're in the care of CPS. And so if they have an advocate that stays with them, which that's our goal, is to always stay with them throughout the entire time, they can be sometimes the one and only person that stays with them the entire time. There was a case that we had where a junior high aged boy was in he was in foster care, and he had so many placement changes that he actually went to 7 different schools in the time period that he was in foster care, which was within a year, 7 schools. So think about junior high. They have multiple teachers. So 5 or 6 teachers times 7 different schools. And I can't do that math in my head, but that's a lot of teachers. And his advocate was the one and only person that was consistently with him and could go to the next school and to the next set of teachers and say, look, this is what was going on at his previous school. Let's see if we can get him this. Let's see if we can get him this help. But to have that one person consistently with him, invaluable. Because otherwise, all these teachers are like, what, this kid is coming, he's got issues and problems, and he's causing issues in my class. But the advocate was the one constant.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, that's been my, thankfully for me, I had an attorney who was extremely involved. He went to birthday parties with me, when we would, or visitations, or not always, but on more than one occasion, did he accompany me to places, and just, he had been involved with the family for a while, and he was just a good person, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so, that was nice, but had I not had him, and then I had great workers, but without that, because I am on a lot of, support groups on Facebook and various foster and adoptive families. And it's very scary. It is very scary because you have, unfortunately, sometimes there's caseworkers or attorneys that never even make it out to the home. Yeah. Like, how do you represent a child in court and you've never laid eyes on the child because the child doesn't even come to court? Right. So, a phone call is just not enough, COVID or not. It's just not. And
I agree. I know COVID has definitely put a new spin on things for us, for sure. But.
So I'm really grateful. For CASA. So, okay, what else? Because at this point, I have no idea what else you guys do. I kind of get the picture. I totally get the volunteer. It's exciting. I told everybody when I was in the throes of foster parent. I think I've become I'm channeling my inner Erin Brockovich. I was constantly, researching and digging and investigating and all this kind of stuff. And it's you can't help it. You cannot help it. Family trees. I had family trees and all based on Facebook. But right. It's you're trying to understand. Like that was really the point. I wasn't necessarily trying to accomplish one thing. I just needed to know. I just needed to understand.
Right.
Because I did want to advocate, and so I think maybe there's a Casa volunteer position for me at some point down the line. So what would I do? What would I do if I wanted to be? Let's just skip to that. Like
So we have recruitment team, and then her name is Shelly. Actually, she's awesome, and you talk to her, and she kind of interviews you and kind of asks questions about why you want to get involved. What are your thoughts about it and that kind of thing. And then you go through a training process. So the training is a little bit intense. It's 30 hours of training, and then we also do 12 hours of continuing education every year that we are required to do just to keep up on the latest things that are happening. So the training is it's very, very valuable though, because I learned it's like drinking from a fire hose. I mean, you learn so much stuff. They give you a binder of information, and so you learn a ton about just the court system and how it works and all the different players and all the different acronyms that you have to know when you're standing in the courtroom that they're saying, and kind of your requirements of what you're supposed to do as an advocate and how you advocate for the children the best way you can. And then so when you complete your training, they basically say, okay, so these are the cases that came in today. Which one do you want? And I remember that when I finished my training, the day I finished, they said, okay, we have these 3 cases. It's this child, this age, this situation. Which one do you want? And I just kind of deer in the headlights. When you start to actually hear the real stories of why they were removed, even if it's a vague general, description, it's sobering for sure. Because you're just like, wow. I mean, okay, I'm about to embark on this very interesting journey here. So I took my case that day and never looked back. And so I'm on my 3rd case now.
Because they last a minimal. They usually last a year, right?
Minimum a year.
Mine was
usually.
Almost 3, but
they can do that. They can drag on like that. So they ask us to commit to at least 12 months, and then if the case ends up going a lot longer than that, they can assign a new advocate if you're not able to stay on. But most of our advocates do stay on for the length of whatever that is. Yeah. Because once you get in it too, and you are kind of like their person. Yeah. You don't want to leave. You know?
I'm sure you don't want to leave unless there was something you absolutely had to.
Yeah. So you're on for the length of the entire case. Yeah. So every one of those hearings, so you have, the hearing we talked about, and then you're visiting the child in between, you're making your court report, you're making recommendations. And then you have like status hearings along the way where the court is just checking in. How are things going? At that point is also the time to make new recommendations if you want to recommend they need something specific, or if you're saying, I think they need to be moved, that kind of a thing. And you have those along the way. And then, you get towards the end. And then at the end, they ask us to make a recommendation on what is the best permanent placement for the child. So throughout the entire year or so that we're on that case, we're gathering as much information as we can about family, about relatives, about, there's also the biological parents and what they're doing. That's a whole nother aspect. Yeah. Sometimes they're working really hard to do what they need to do.
Do you visit them or no?
It depends on the case. So so if they're working services and they're really trying to do what they can, then part of our role is helping them in that, supporting them in that. And if they're really doing what it takes to get their kids back, then we want to support that as well if that's what's happening, So every case really is a completely different thing than the one before, because there's always different variables involved. But we will make a recommendation at the end on what we think is best. It doesn't always go the way we say it should go, but the judge really does rely heavily on what we recommend.
Has it been hard for you to, I've often thought, kids come into care, and hopefully if all works, if the system works like it's supposed to, they're being looked at, they're being assessed, needs are being met, right? I often thought, wouldn't it be amazing, because we want to reunify, right?
Right.
But our focus has primarily been on the child. I wish we could have more focus on the biological. I wish they had an advocate. They do have an attorney.
Right.
Sometimes that's a great match and sometimes it's not.
Right.
But having an advocate for them, having an advocate that says, hey, this parenting class that we're sending them to, it stinks. I mean, it's no bueno.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Or it would be nice, because you want to reform. We got to reform.
Yeah. And I mean, in a way, as an advocate for their child, if they really are making a big effort, then we can become an advocate for them as well, because we know what's best for that child if their parent can get their act together is to be with their parent. Yeah. So we will work alongside biological parents in that way. Yeah. And you're right, reunification is always the goal, if at all possible, because the children, that's what they want. That's what they desire. Yeah. So if the parents can really make a big effort to make a change in their life, and we can help support them in that, we're always going to do that. Yeah. For sure. It
is so sticky. How have you been able to, again, you don't have to answer this question, but has it been difficult for you to separate, a man, I don't know. Did you know Jim Spivey?
Yes.
You did? Okay. So he used to say to us, he called it detached commitment. And so what that means, and Kyle and I use this phrase all the time, but you're totally committed, right? You're all in, and yet you're able to detach. So you can come home to your family and, as Kyle used to tell me, look around you. You're okay. You see what I'm saying? When I would get too vested in whatever was going on. Right. We don't need to talk about what those things were, but stepping out of this role that you're playing in the mess and the muck and it's not pretty. If a child gets removed, it is not pretty. I don't care what happened. It's not pretty. Right. So you step out of this and you move back into the Miller home. And has that been hard? Has that been the challenge for you?
I mean, I think yes. I think anyone that says no to that is probably in denial, because of course it's hard. I mean, it's real life situations happening in front of your eyes. But I think that phrase is a great way to describe it, because I am fully committed. And I think that's how I get beyond that, is I'm so fully committed to the best interest of that child or that set of siblings that I'm able to do what I do and then go home and then go back to doing what I do with them, because that's what's best for them. So and it's not best necessarily for me to be super attached to them or want to bring them home or, you know what I mean? That is not my role. My role is to advocate for them and make sure their needs are being met and make sure they find a safe, permanent, loving home. And so I'm able to compartmentalize it in that way, I guess.
Yeah, that's good. That means you're healthy. But it is tricky. And I noticed after we moved from foster care to adoption, when there was so much, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but just the only word I can think of. I wish I could think of another word because I don't like this word, but drama of the whole thing. Does she stay? Does she go? Does she go here? Does she go there? What's the attorney going to say? What's the caseworker say? Did all these things, right? Yeah. It was a separating period of learning a new normal again. You know what I mean? Because this, in a way, this wasn't normal. Yeah. And so it's been good. That's been good. That's felt good. Well, I'm glad to hear that, because do they talk about that in your training at all? That you have to learn to.
Yes, they really prepare you well for the process and for what that's like, and what your very specific role in the child's life and in the case is. Yeah. So I would say you're very, very prepared for that when you. And I walked in. I'll be honest. I walked into the training thinking, I think my mindset on kids in foster care was, their parents are bad. They don't deserve their kids. They did something horrible to them. Sure. And that was literally I think that's probably what most people think that don't know. Like looking from the outside, that's what they think. And
then you can even go a step further, like foster parents. They just are in it for the money.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. There's all these preconceived notions about CPS is terrible. Yeah. And, there's all this stuff that you think when you don't really know and you're not in it. And then in the training, I was so surprised and just like the transformation that happened in my own mind about the process and about, just all of it, and how I completely changed how I looked at all of it, really, and really was able to then approach my cases in a much more open-minded way. Yeah. And just knowing that not every parent is terrible, and that sometimes they end up in situations that they don't even mean to be in, you know, and that's not always the case. Right. Every one of them is different, but just being able to be very open to whatever is best for that child, regardless of what my own preconceived notions were before I did the training. That's it doesn't matter what I thought about it. Yeah. You know, it doesn't.
Yeah. So that's great. That is great. And I think that is beautiful, that we can let go of those things and we can just be there, you know, for that child. Okay. Finally, I just want to end on, you know, unless you have anything else, I have one more question I want to go for. Okay. Anything else? I don't want to leave anything off the table. Okay. So one thing I also noticed, you know, in our training as foster parents is a lot too. And it's ongoing. Most of us have about 40 hours of pre-service, right? So we're doing a lot of training before a child ever enters our home. And then on a yearly basis, my agency requires another 40 hours. Wow. So it's a lot of training. And a big bulk of it is in trauma, because obviously any child, well, all of us have experienced trauma. Right. I mean, every single person walking this planet, it was traumatic the day they were born, and we, you know, before they were born, you know, we are all experienced trauma, but a big piece of it is trauma. And honestly, if I'm very authentic, and I think other parents listening to this podcast would definitely validate this, but honestly, it is the people involved are not typically as trained, right, as we are as parents. I mean, I can't speak to every agency, obviously, but I know that the agencies in our area I know the training that they're getting, and it is far superior than the training that I received on the DFPS website, and things like that. And so this isn't a gripe session, but it is a very real concern. And so one thing I've heard through the grapevine, maybe through you, I don't know, is that Casa is educating their advocates in trauma. They're becoming trauma informed. Yep, okay. Absolutely. It's a big part of the training. And then we have other specific extra trainings that you can do just specifically for that. But they do talk a lot about it in our general training to become an advocate. And that is because, like you said, I mean, everyone's experienced trauma, but these kids that we're dealing with have experienced big T trauma. Enormous amount of trauma, you know, in their very short lives that they have had. And so for us to have the knowledge of how to handle a child who has had trauma, and for us to be able to pass that along to a foster parent that might not be trained in that way. Yeah, because some agencies aren't requiring. So they train us so that we can then help a foster parent, for instance, how to deal with a child that is acting out and why. Let's look at why they're doing that, and let's look at how we can, you know, help that child through what they're going through. Right. Same with their teachers. I mean, we're very, very involved in their education as well. So if they've got issues at school, they're acting out, we can actually go to their counselor and say, look, we can't talk to the counselor about what the child has been through, but we can say, you know, we think that this is why they're acting this way. Let's try this tactic instead. Yeah. Let's try, you know, we can offer suggestions on how to handle that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, and we actually just opened in our Casa office. It's called Casa Connection Corner, and it is a trauma-informed training room that we can bring foster parents into with their foster kids, or even biological parents, if that's the case, with their child. And we have specific things in the room that just teach them how to, you know, what to do with those things and how they can use them in their daily life to deal with kids that are having issues because of their past trauma. So it's a big part of what we do. Yeah. And I this brings me to a really exciting thing. You, when you and I talked about this, you mentioned that her name is Anne-Marie. Yes. But tell me exactly, because I noticed on her. Okay, so go ahead. I'll tell me who Anne-Marie is. Yeah. So Anne-Marie is she's our new executive director for Casa. Okay. And Anne-Marie was actually the training director, and she trained me as an advocate, and she is so informed on trauma. Well, she's a TBRI practitioner. Yes, that's what I was going to say. That's what I was getting. I was like, I noticed I emailed her, and I'll we're going to have her next week on the podcast. So,
Yeah.
But I noticed in her signature, it says TBRI practitioner. So
Yes.
I was really excited about that.
Yeah, she's very, very, and she actually, I mean, she'll tell you her story,
Okay.
but she's adopted some children as well,
Okay.
and had to go through some things with her own adoptive children that
Okay.
helped her realize how important that
Trauma
TBRI was
Yeah.
and knowing and being knowledgeable about how to handle situations
Yeah.
like that. So she is very, very versed on all of that stuff and really a wealth of knowledge when it comes to TBRI.
I can't wait. Thanks for the intro.
Yeah.
And so she's going to come next week. So
Yeah.
we'll get her next week, guys. Okay. Final thing. It's very important, but I forgot it. I need to ask the handsome camera guy to bring it to me. A Mama's Well t-shirt. It's right over there. It's so important because, Lindsay, you need one.
Okay, I do.
I mean, everyone
Yes.
watching this needs one. Thank you. I was going to wear it, but I didn't want to. I don't know.
Oh, I love it.
Mama's Well t-shirt.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and
Thank
it's
you.
super soft.
I love it.
Looks super cute. No, you can't have it yet. I have to show you.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to take it.
I put it on last night. I was trying it on with a golden yellow tank under it because you
Yes.
can kind of see the tank right there.
Love it.
Super cute for
Yeah.
you today, my dear.
Thank you so
and
much.
for you can buy them on my website, mamaswell.com. Thank you, Lindsay. This was great.
Yeah, thank you so much for
You're
having me.
so easy to talk to.
Oh, thank you.
And I wish I would have had a Casa volunteer. But you know what? Can you this is another great question.
Yeah.
Can you ask for one? Like say I'm in, you probably don't know this because you guys all have it, but I wonder
Right.
if you could.
I'm actually not 100%
Yeah.
sure on that.
Well, you know what? My dad used to say, Lindsay, he used to say the highest price you can ever pay for something is to ask.
Yeah, that's true.
Now, I don't know
like that.
exactly what that means
Yeah.
other than I always ask.
Well, it doesn't hurt to ask.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah, if you
of
forget
course.
to pay your credit card and they give you a late fee, you can just ask, would you mind taking that off?
I love that.
It works one time a year. Anyway, thank you guys. Thank you, Lindsay. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget, it's important that you like and subscribe on YouTube and also on, whatever podcast platform you're listening to. I think this is my understanding, but the more likes, the more subscribes, the more comments, the more reviews, that kind of moves us up to where more people are exposed. So if this is something that you're enjoying, and if you stay till the bitter end, then that would be you. So like, subscribe, leave a comment, and I'll see you next week.
Mama's Well.
Yes, she